Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I'm doing very well, thank you very much. And I'm so pleased to be sharing a story with you tonight. So I do hope that you're lovely and cozy and snug, and that you've got that lovely hot cup of drink, and whatever it is, let me know what it is, because I love hearing from you. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, it was 1954. I was 15 years old at the time, living in West Virginia on a horse farm, where I was raised with my two brothers, Roth and Mick, under the careful supervision of both of our parents, who homeschooled us on the farm, raising us to be proficient in taking care of horses, as it was more than likely that we would follow in their footsteps. The farmhouse was a perfectly symmetrical box-shaped building that was very pleasing on the eyes, with 3 rows of perfectly aligned windows, with a green slate roof and a central front door, with a large wraparound porch that snuggled around the entire house, overlooking idyllic panoramic views of the breathtaking countryside, along with glorious meadows where horses grazed and frolicked at leisure. My father had inherited the farm from his father, who was still very much alive at the time, living on the farm with the family. He was a reticent, self-effacing, unassuming man that obscurely shrunk in the shadows, so much so that you hardly ever knew he was even there. But he was always attentively listening, observing everything that was going on. He rather reminded me of a wizened tortoise with a little shrunken face, weathered by spending too much time in the sun, while his discerning eyes were a deep brown colour, and they missed nothing. The sprawling farm was beautiful, with acres of flowering meadows hemmed in by white picket fencing. There were feed barns, tack rooms and stable blocks, along with an exercise ring. Our lives always smelt of hay, wood shavings, leather and horse manure. Growing up, my life would have been pretty close to perfect if it hadn't been for the unfortunate fact that my father was intentionally abusive towards me. He wasn't nursing a grudge or vendetta against the female gender by any manner of means, but I was the spitting image of my father's mother, which was something my father could never get his head around. Seeing me bobbing around the farm happily haunted him. He almost detested my smiling face. It was almost as if my laughter was actually tortuous to him. When he was a young boy, his draconian mother had tirelessly abused him with her pernicious, loose tongue that was unrelentingly cruel, brutish and unkind. Now he was returning the favour to me, as if in some way getting at me was lashing back at his own mother, whom he had despised for so long. Of course he made no secret as to why he had made my life a living hell. He would say I was the reincarnation of her, that I had returned from the grave to torment him all over again. It wasn't ever going to happen this time, he assured me, not on his watch, now that he was in charge, for he was the one wearing the boots. I danced on her grave when she died, he told me. I was so glad to see the back of her, and then you were born. Now when I look at your face, I'm plagued with seeing my mother every day of my life, all over again, as if the good Lord is punishing me. I had seen photographs of my grandmother. It was hauntingly airy how much I looked like her. No one could dispute this fact, although my brothers and mother would say there was no such thing as reincarnation. They even chastised my father for taking his grievances out on me. But he did. I could discern the heartless hatred, visibly perceiving the hostile, vicious look in his brown eyes whenever he studied me from across the dinner table. His body would visibly stiffen. His jawline would become tight with tension. A deep frown would break out on his face. Sometimes he would even puff like a dragon when I was around, as if smoke was coming out of his nostrils. It might as well have been. Never a kind word came out of his lips for me. I began to experience my father's wrath. This was payback for what his mother had done to him as a boy. I was to understand that she had sometimes locked him up in the closet for several hours at a time when he'd done something that had really upset her. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for a vulnerable little boy who was terribly afraid of the dark. Worse still, her sharp, cold-blooded tongue, which may as well have been forked, had tirelessly whipped him with her murderous words, crushing his heart with their poisonous venom. Yet why should I suffer as a result of what my father's mother had done to him years before? I may have looked exactly like her, but I was not her reincarnation. But for some reason, my father absolutely believed that I was. It would seem that even my grandfather had been under the control of this formidable sadistic woman, as he never once intervened in his wife's unreasonable behaviour towards his own son. Instead, he was a quiet man who had busied himself in the running of the farm, wilfully turning a blind eye to his wife's manic rages. Ostensibly, my father had almost despised him for ignoring his mother's unreasonable, obstinate behaviour. But once his mother had died, his father had apologised profusely to him. His mother died on a riding accident where she'd fallen off a horse, sustaining massive hemorrhaging to the brain. It would seem after her passing, not much grieving had occurred in that small town. Even her own husband didn't shed a tear, and admitted as much. For years her gravestone stood in an untended, abandoned part of the farm, gathering moss and lichen, never so much as receiving even a scant offering of petals over the gravesite. All had remembered her as an intolerant woman who wore her grey hair in a tight bun, as well as a severe expression on her face every day of her life. Many claimed to have seen a shadowy figure when riding past the gravesite. People believed it could be her ghost, so everyone avoided that spot like the plague. Even strange orbs had been spotted there at night. When she was alive, the horses on the farm had given her a wide girth, as animals are remarkably sensitive to human energy. "You must understand, my son, I was under your mother's thumb. She was a formidable, vexatious woman. If I had intervened in how she treated you, that woman would have killed me, buried me under the patio," his father had told him. "You know she would have done so, son." At that they both shared a private laugh together, as both son and father could easily visualize the malignant witch-like woman burying him under the patio, covering up all the evidence of his death, while fobbing off the police with her persuasive, eloquent lies. This seemed to amuse both of them greatly. The joke was unbecomingly macabre, but it somehow broke the ice between the two of them, and son and father had grown close over the years since she had died. My mother was a good woman who saw how contrary my father's attitude was towards me. I was a perpetual reminder to him of his mother's wrath. Now he was the one filling his mother's shoes, treating me with equal disdain, working me harder on the farm than either of my brothers, whipping me with his vicious words. Presumably he had become like the very woman he despised. The abused had become the abuser. There was a huge dissimilitude with the way he spoke to me, as to the way he treated my brothers. The discrimination was very pronounced. He'd call me harebrain, gollywog, little brains. Come over here right now. Why have you not mucked out the stables yet? Get a move on, will you? Stop dithering, lazy bones. One day my brother took me to one side, giving me a generous handful of cash. Take Dad's old truck. Leave the farm at once, sis. I'm tired of seeing Dad profanely abuse you. I can't stand the way he demeans, dishonours and degrades you, calling you all kinds of nasty, humiliating names. Oh, it's not right. I can't allow myself to sit back, seeing Dad treat you in this disparaging, contemptuous way. It's grossly unfair. You deserve a much better life, sis. You can make a fresh start somewhere else. If anyone can do it, you can. I want you to be happy. I've heard you crying yourself to sleep at night. I worry about you all the time, sis. I need you to leave for your own sanity. I don't want to think that you could become a gibbering wreck later on in life because Dad patronised you so much when you were young. It's very wrong what he's doing to you. But where will I go? Drive to Lexington in Kentucky, sis. There are lots of horse farms around there. I'm sure you'll be able to find work. As I said, if anyone can do it, you can do it. Tell your potential employers you want room and board, that you have a plethora of experience working with horses. They can speak to me if they want a reference. He took me into his arms, giving me a big hug. Over the years, it's made me cringe seeing Dad's abysmal treatment of you. I know there's a brighter future out there for you, sis. Please stay in touch. Let us know where you are. I'll tell Mum you're safe, not to worry about you. Dad will be glad when you're gone. I hate to say it, but it's true. I'm scared. Our farm is all I've ever known. I don't want to leave you or Mum. Be brave, sis. You can't stay here, you know you can't. I worry that one day Dad's words will turn physical. That day, he stammered, he could potentially hurt you, sis. Even though it could be unlikely to happen, anger can have a terrible effect on people. It can turn violent. So there I was with a handful of cash and my father's battered old truck that he would be unlikely to miss. I packed a small, rather battered-looking suitcase that had seen better days with some of my more practical clothes, and off I went into the wide blue yonder, hoping I wouldn't be caught without a license. Let me assure you, for a 15-year-old girl, it was a terrifying prospect, but I knew my brother was absolutely right. My father's abusive ways were getting worser the older I became, as I seemed to remind him more and more of his mother. I didn't know how I was going to find a job on a horse farm. I was only 15 with not much meat on my bones. I decided to take the bull by the horns and approached several horse farms who turned me away, viewing me suspiciously and telling me that they didn't need my help. They seemed sceptical that a young girl like myself could even be an asset to their farm. My heart was heavily laden. I was certain I'd have to return home to West Virginia with my tail between my legs, admitting defeat. The following day I arrived at a horse farm run by an elderly couple who had no children of their own. "I'm looking for work, ma'am," I told the old woman. "Board and lodgings, if I may. I know I'm slight, but I promise you, ma'am, I'm really good with horses." "I don't doubt that for a moment," said the woman with a bright twinkle in her piercing blue eyes. "I can see you have a gentle spirit, dear. Horses respond to that very favourably. Come with me," she said, leading me into her kitchen and putting on the kettle. "What's your name, girl?" "Lydia Pierce," I told her. The old lady placed a hot mug of tea in my hands. She sat down opposite me, looking intently with her eyes, as if she was reading me like a book. "You're running away from something, aren't you, girl? You tell me your story. I'm a good listener, I really am." I nodded, tears springing into my eyes. "It's my father. He hates me." The woman looked aghast. "But that makes no sense at all. Why would your father hate you? He's very blessed to have such a beautiful, precious daughter like you. Does he not realise that? Can he not see that you're a gift from God? Me and my husband Howie tried for years to have children of our own, but the good Lord never blessed us with a child. I was barren like Hannah in the Bible, crying out for a baby, but the Lord did not bless my womb. But then there are people like your father who are gifted with a child, which is a loan to them from the good Lord, which he's expected to honour and to cherish and love with his whole heart. But instead he behaves disgracefully. It's like throwing a present back at someone who's brought you something terribly nice. It's offensive, very rude. He thinks I'm the reincarnation of his mother whom he hated, so he's very scornful towards me, to extract his revenge. I'm the spitting image of her in every way, you see. My mannerisms, the way I laugh, my physical appearance. It's very unfortunate. Believe me, I'd give anything not to look like her, especially since she was such a despicable person." "That's shocking, dear. It seems your father is the despicable one here. What about your mother? Doesn't she stand up for you, fight your corner for you? I'd never put up with Howie if he was disrespectful towards our daughter, if we were fortunate enough to have one, based on some misguided perceptions. She tried. She's done her best. So have my brothers. But they simply can't get through to him. He's so bull-headed and bloody-minded. It was my brother that begged me to leave, to find a job. They're worried that my father's ruthless tongue could turn violent towards me one day. They could be right. You see, the older I get, the more I remind him of his mother. I tell you what, I'll write to your mother, let her know that you're safely under my charge, and that you're fine. She must be worried sick about you. You can move into our farmhouse into the spare room. It seems that God has sent us a daughter after all," she said, smiling joyously. "So you'll give me work on your farm with your horses?" "I'll do more than that, dear. I'll give you the home that you've always deserved, the home you were meant to have, a home filled with laughter, happiness and love. I know the good Lord has sent you our way. It's never too late to have a daughter." There are no words to describe the kindness of Enid and her husband Howie, who took me under their wings like the child they never had, showering me with their unconditional love. We became a close family. From time to time I would get the occasional sporadic visit from my mother and my two loving brothers, who were grateful to see me under the care of two such kind, generous people, who adored me as if I was their own flesh and blood, while Howie became for me a true and loving father. "I'm so thankful to you," my mother told Enid, "for taking care of my daughter. I don't trust my husband with her. I would have these dreadful nightmares that one day he would whack her on the back of the head and make her just disappear." Enid was visibly shocked. "You think he could have done that to his own daughter?" she asked, looking appalled. My mother looked awkward. She let out an uncomfortable cough. "Well, you never know what people are capable of, do you?" she had said, "when they're filled with hatred. Even the nicest people in the world are capable of doing contemptible, detestable things. I am of the opinion that if the bull is seeing red, get rid of the red so that the bull will cease his attack. My husband saw red every time he looked at Lydia. The wise, sensible thing to do was to get Lydia safely out of the way. It's so much better to be safe than sorry. Isn't it a bit extreme, your husband hating his daughter so much? All this nonsense about reincarnation. It does seem a bit over the top to me." "It isn't to my husband," my mother explained. "Lydia's presence in our home has tormented him, as everything about her reminds him of his mother. It's like my Lydia was haunting his life, only she wasn't a ghost from the dead, but a ghost in his present life. She made his past come thundering back, and rekindled all those hurtful memories for him of being abused by his mother. By all accounts, she was a dreadful woman, a real bully with a tongue on her so sharp she could cut glass. She undermined my poor husband so much with her cruel words. She told him he would never amount to much, that he had a brain the size of a pea, and she rued the very day that he was born. The spiteful woman locked him up in the closet, denying him food for an entire day. She was a nasty piece of work. I know it seems unreasonable, his treatment of Lydia, but you must understand she is the splitting image of my husband's mother." "That is most unfortunate for Lydia," said Enid. "But I do believe your husband's treatment of her has been outrageous. Two wrongs certainly don't make a right." "Oh, I quite agree with you. But to tell you the truth, I feel so relieved for us not to have Lydia on the farm with us. My husband is a much happier man these days. He's been able to put the past behind him now that Lydia doesn't keep reminding him of his mother. We also feel much better knowing that Lydia is safe with you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your kindness in regards to this matter." "We love having her here," said Enid. "I have 80 members of staff on this farm. They all adore her. She's been a blessing to me and Howie. We have no children of our own. And as for the horses on the farm, they adore her. We have a difficult stallion that has been unpredictable, but your daughter is the only one who has got through to him. I found her sleeping in his stall the other day, as he was frightened of the storm. All the grooms thought she'd be trampled on by the temperamental horse, but not so. The stallion has connected with her in a remarkable way. It seems your daughter's reassuring words calmed him down considerably. She's a natural with horses. All the staff are amazed and impressed how the horse has become so much calmer thanks to Lydia. We're hoping he'll sire the next Kentucky Derby winner. We're thinking of breeding him with one of our mares." "And why not?" my mother said. "You've got a fine farm here." I loved spending time on the horse farm with Lydia and Howie. I enjoyed spending time with the horses and the staff on the property. Before long I didn't miss my own home, as Enid and Howie's traditional farmhouse had become home to me. It was much grander than our horse farm in West Virginia. The stables were state-of-the-art. They owned some of the finest breeding stallions in the county. One day a woman arrived on our farm with a temperamental stallion in her trailer, one that was so magnificent it took my breath away, but for some reason it had been abused, and so it didn't trust humans at all, especially not men. Its name was Fire Dancer. From the moment I laid eyes on the horse, my heart melted, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he surveyed humans with a wariness that was tangible, and when men came near him, he would rise up on his back legs and kick the ground fiercely. "What happened to this horse?" asked Enid. "You don't want to know," said the woman. "He's been very badly abused, traumatised by the previous owner. Despicable man. The horse was thankfully confiscated from him. I told the authorities I'd find a perfect home where he'd receive the love and care he needs. I thought of you and Howie. I'm glad you thought of us. He's a fine thoroughbred," said Enid. "I know a young lady who will get through to this stallion. Her name's Lydia Pierce. She connects with horses like no one I know, especially broken ones. Maybe that's because she's broken herself, so she gets them." "Well, that's the best news ever, Enid. I knew you and Howie would work a plan for the stallion." It was decided that I was the one that would help Fire Dancer. I knew firsthand what it was like to be abused. It was easy for me to communicate with difficult animals. It was very clear that Fire Dancer was beginning to trust me, and me alone. I was the only person that could ride him. He would nuzzle me, eat apples from my hand, rub his nose affectionately against my face. We had developed an unlikely bond. I would regularly take him for rides along some fabulous hiking trails. Everyone was stunned, as the horse was becoming so much calmer and more serene. I would wash his coat, brush him, talk to him, feed him, and he began to trust me with his whole heart. The transformation in his demeanour was nothing short of miraculous. One day when Howie and Enid had gone away for the weekend to visit Howie's sister, I had decided to stay behind at the farmhouse. I knew in normal circumstances that Enid would not be best pleased with me taking a ride so late in the afternoon with Fire Dancer, as she would have considered that a foolish thing to do. But what she didn't know would not hurt her. I'd always fancied taking a late afternoon ride. Besides, Fire Dancer needed some exercise. I'd be back soon, I told myself, and nobody would be any the wiser. How wrong I was. Fire Dancer seemed thrilled to be saddled up. He was looking forward to the ride as much as I was. The two of us were a great team. The bond that I had developed with Fire Dancer had grown in leaps and bounds. She was completely reliant on me. We were trotting together happily down a hiking trail, one that I'd never taken before. It was rather unfamiliar to me. There was a still wind blowing against my face. It was fall, and the bountiful trefoil swathed the ground in a rich, luxuriant, golden russet carpet of crunchy leaves that rustled in the wind. It was a magically enchanting afternoon, but it was folding away very quickly. The sun was beginning to set. The whole valley was dappled in a rich tangerine orange sunset. It was so incredibly beautiful trotting under the canopy of trees down that hiking trail. In a trice the landscape became gloomy. The sky took on a grey hue. The trees became dark, dense silhouettes, standing up tall and proud against a deepening sky. And that was when I saw several plastic bags blowing on a tree. Someone had attached them to a tree like balloons. I don't know if they'd placed them there deliberately, but the sight of these plastic bags blowing backwards and forwards against the breeze, combined with the whooshing sound they were making, scared the living daylights out of poor Fire Dancer. Calm down, I told the horse, but she reared up on her back legs. She began to gallop frantically, losing any sense of direction, as terror infused her body. She slipped into an adrenal fight and flight response. I went flying off her, landing on the ground in a crumpled heap, while Fire Dancer bolted away as fast as she could. My guess was she'd fled back to the farm at a very fast gallop. She would soon realise I wasn't with her once she calmed down. I tried to get up from my position, but my left side was literally killing me. I knew I had to have broken something quite badly. I was beginning to regret impulsively taking Fire Dancer for a ride so late in the afternoon. It was rather reckless of me. No one knew I was out with her. I was in the middle of the hiking trail. I knew I had to manoeuvre myself to the embankment, so I slid my body along the ground, crying out in agonizing pain with every movement, as shooting spasms darted through my body. I had no choice but to wait until someone came to rescue me. It could be a long time before anyone realised I was missing. In the meantime, it looked like I'd be spending the night in the wood grove. It was getting a lot cooler now that it was autumn, but luckily I wouldn't freeze to death. Not in this weather. I was shivering, though, but it wasn't that cold. My only concern was that a wild animal like a mountain lion could be loitering around. I would be easy pickings for such a formidable beast. I managed to find a long stick that I could use to defend myself. I guess it made me feel better, not that it would be much of a defence anyway. There are no words to describe the pain that I was going through. Truly, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before or since, even after I had my baby. I closed my eyes tightly and prayed for God to keep me safe. I tried not to focus on the pain. That was an exceedingly difficult thing to do. But somehow I managed to fall into a deep sleep. I think the shock of the fall must have knocked me out to a degree. The sleep offered me a fleeting respite from the throbbing pain. I remember waking up to the strange grunting sound. I looked up to see this tall, dark creature staring at me. It was the strangest-looking creature I've ever seen in my life. Its face was like that of a man, but its body was like that of a bear. You could be forgiven for thinking a man had stepped into an oversized bear suit, yet I could tell the body of this creature was real, as no human being on this planet I know could have been as tall and wide as he was. Besides, I could see the grey skin beneath his hair, as well as the very defined muscle tension, which was incredibly impressive. This creature was easily 9 foot tall, 700 to 800 pounds, possibly 3 feet wide across the shoulder area or more. He had human-like hands and feet. I could tell the creature was very intelligent as he studied me through his deep, dark brown eyes, as if he was trying to fathom what was wrong with me. He never asked me that specific question because obviously he couldn't speak my language, but I felt as if he did. I told him that I'd fallen off a horse. I used my hands to imitate the horse. I pointed to the hoof marks on the ground. I think he understood because he grunted. I demonstrated to him that I could not get up. The creature grunted again. He then let out a long whistle. And then gliding through the trees came another one of these strange creatures in response to that whistle. The other creature was a female with breasts. The two creatures began to engage in an earnest conversation together, as if they were discussing what they should do with me. I sensed they felt that in some way I was their responsibility. They spoke together in an audible language backwards and forwards over and over again, as if they couldn't agree on something. Finally, the female nodded her head, watching me as the male lifted me up into his arms. I should have been terribly afraid given his great size and girth, but you can tell when something's trying to help you, and I sensed that these creatures were doing just that. The female creature pointed in 2 directions, to the right, and I shook my head as no, and to the left, and I nodded. They both knew that I was from the horse farm on the left-hand side of the valley. The creature carried me in his arms. He seemed worried about hurting me. I pointed to my leg and let out some really bad whimpers as the pain went shooting through my leg. For a while the male looked hesitant, locking eyes with the female, as if to say, "Is this a good idea? Perhaps we should watch over her until human help arrives." The female seemed insistent that he should take me, so he obeyed. I felt a huge relief as he glided down the horse-riding trail, with the female by his side. She ran with us. The creature carried me in his arms so gently. He never jolted my body once. If he had done so, I would have almost certainly winced in pain. I could feel the cool breeze blowing against my face, hear the rise and fall of his heartbeat. He also breathed exactly like a horse, which I found really rather amusing. I could smell the scent of the earth on him, mixed with the scent of a human sweat, but it wasn't offensive by any manner of means. I could see that to this remarkable creature I was as light as a feather. He carried me effortlessly through the gates, down the long drive. It was quite dark, but the outside lights were on, so the silhouettes of the barns and the stable block were clearly visible, while there were lights on in some of the groomsmen's cottages. Of course, the farmhouse where I lived with Howie and Enid was all in darkness, indicating that no one was at home. I pointed to the farmhouse and to the front doorstep, and they put me down there. I said thank you to the creatures. They stood there as if they were still worried about leaving me out there. I didn't think I could expect these creatures to take me directly into the house. The key was under the mat. I told them I'd be fine, and they both looked at each other and then at me. I remember the golden dark brown eyes looked into mine, I felt as if they were saying, "Are you sure you're going to be all right?" I nodded. The creatures looked bemused and seemed uncertain. They glided past one of the groom's cottages that was close to the main house. I was to learn later that they threw a couple of rocks at the front door. The groom came out of the cottage in time to see two dark silhouettes disappearing and slipping into the trees. What the heck was that, he wondered. I could see the groomsman with his torch wandering around his yard. I shouted out to him, "Danny, is that you?" The groomsman came bounding from his cottage, having heard my voice, with Fire Dancer having heard me too, trotting behind him. He was no worse for wear from his adventure. "What the hell happened?" asked Danny. "Why is Fire Dancer out and not in his stable? Why are you sitting on the front doorstep?" "I can't walk," I explained. "I fell off Fire Dancer. I think I've broken my leg. I can't move it. It's hurting so much. It's not aligned correctly." The groomsman looked mystified. "But how did you get here if you couldn't walk?" he asked. "What possessed you to go riding the horse so late? Enid and Howard will not be pleased with you." "It's a long story. Please don't tell them. Don't tell them I went riding so late." "Fair enough, but we need to get you to hospital right now." To cut a long story short, I'd broken my femur really badly and sprained my ankle. Enid and Howard rushed to see me in hospital in a frantic state. "What on earth happened to you?" they asked. I told them I had fallen off Fire Dancer, and two strange hairy-looking creatures had rescued me. They had alerted the groomsman at his cottage to my presence. "You mean a creature that looks like a human covered in hair?" Enid asked. "That's right. I've seen one of them before," she said, "when I was riding my horse down the trail. I remember getting this creepy feeling that I was being watched. My horse became very nervous and reactive. That was when I saw this creature standing behind the trees. I could see this large body covered in long flowing hair. It was studying me curiously with these bright brown eyes. I didn't know what to make of it. It looked so human." "That's right," I said. "That's exactly what the creatures look like." "How extraordinary! To think these creatures rescued you like that. This is an incredible story." To cut a long story short, I did get to see my father before he died. I went to visit him at my old home. I was shocked by how frail he had become. I wasn't sure it was a good idea to see him, but according to my mother, he wanted to make his peace with me before he died. I remember trembling as I entered his room. I hadn't seen him in many years. "Come over here, Lydia," he said. "Let's have a look at you." He seemed surprised as he ran his eyes over me. "You don't look so much like my mother anymore," he chuckled. "That's because I'm not her. I never was." "I'm sorry, child. I wasn't good to you when you were growing up. You looked so much like my mother. I couldn't stand the very sight of you. It was like my past came back to haunt me. I'm very sorry I drove you away." "I'm not," I said. "I've had a very happy life. I've never wanted for anything." "I just want you to forgive me for the way I treated you. I need to go to the grave with peace in my heart." "I forgive you. Believe me, I do. Despite everything, I do think I understand why you treated me the way you did." Indeed, I absolutely had no regrets about how my life panned out. Enid and Howard had become my parents to me. I loved them with my entire heart. They left their horse farm to me in their will, as they considered me their daughter, which now my son manages today. So sometimes the things in life do have a remarkable habit of working out. On my farm there have been occasional sightings of Bigfoot to this very day. Personally, I haven't got a bad word to say about the creatures. I will never forget how those unlikely creatures rescued me from falling off my horse. Not only did they leave me outside my own home, but having realised no one was in, seeing a light on in the groomsman's cottage, they threw rocks at the house so that they could alert him to my presence. They showed initiative and emotional intelligence, and for that I shall never forget their kindness. I never saw those Bigfoots again, but believe me, I can never forget them. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.